The sun kissed the earth with a golden glow as the Parker family set out on their celebratory road trip. Evelyn Parker, a vivacious teenager with dreams of Stanford, sat buzzing with excitement in the back seat, her younger brother, Lucas, next to her. Their mother, Maria, scrolled through her playlist, her soft hum blending with the hum of the engine. At the wheel, Jack Parker, ever composed and steadfast, smiled subtly, proud of his daughter's achievement. They drove through the winding roads of New Mexico, Jack insisting on taking the scenic route. The red mesas loomed majestically, their rugged beauty a perfect backdrop for their journey. Everything seemed idyllic, until flashing blue and red lights disrupted the tranquility. "Why are they stopping us?" Maria whispered, her voice tight. Jack glanced in the rearview mirror, his face calm but cautious. "Stay calm," he said, pulling the SUV to the side. He adjusted the mirror to watch the two officers approach, their movements calculated and deliberate. The air grew heavy as one officer, stocky and stern, demanded Jack's license and registration. Jack complied, his every movement slow and deliberate. The other officer, younger but no less intimidating, peered into the car, his gaze lingering on Evelyn and Lucas. "What's in the car?" the young officer asked, his tone sharp. "Just luggage and snacks," Jack replied evenly. But their calm answers didn't suffice. The officers' questions grew invasive, their demeanor hostile. When Jack politely questioned the necessity of their actions, the older officer's tone hardened. "Step out of the car, all of you." Evelyn clung to Maria, fear flickering in her wide eyes. Jack nodded at his family, his voice steady. "Do as they say. Stay together." As they exited the car, the officers began rifling through their belongings, their aggression escalating. Lucas's prized sketchbook was tossed carelessly onto the gravel. Evelyn's voice quivered as she whispered, "Why are they doing this?" Jack's jaw tightened, but his tone remained calm. "Stay close to your mom." But calm wouldn't last long, and the Parker family was about to face more than they ever anticipated. The gravel crunched beneath Jack's polished shoes as he stood motionless, watching the officers rifle through their meticulously packed bags. Lucas fidgeted, his small hands gripping Maria's as she whispered soothing words, though her voice carried a tremor she couldn't hide. Evelyn, usually outspoken, stayed silent, her fists clenched as she stared at the officers disrespecting her belongings. "What's going on, Dad?" Lucas asked quietly, his voice barely audible. Jack bent down slightly, his tone soft but resolute. "They're just trying to provoke us. Stay calm, stay together." The older officer slammed the SUV's hatch shut and turned toward Jack, his hand never straying far from his holstered weapon. "Your story's too neat," he sneered. "Out-of-state plates, fancy luggage, doesn't add up." Jack's voice remained level. "We're on a family trip to celebrate my daughter's achievement. That's all." But the officers weren't interested in explanations. The younger one circled them like a predator, his gaze landing on Evelyn. "Let's see your ID," he demanded. Jack's composure faltered for a split second. He stepped slightly in front of Evelyn, shielding her. "You don't need to question my kids. This has gone far enough." "Sir," the older officer barked, his tone dripping with mock authority, "you're in no position to decide what's far enough." Evelyn felt her pulse quicken as the officer's hand twitched toward his taser. The tension was suffocating, but before she could react, Lucas's phone buzzed in his pocket. He hesitated, then pulled it out. "I'm recording this," Lucas said, his voice trembling but loud enough to cut through the officer's taunts. The younger officer spun around, his eyes narrowing. "What do you think you're doing, kid?" Lucas's grip tightened on the phone, making sure everyone knows what's happening here. The officer lunged, yanking the phone out of Lucas's hand. It hit the ground with a sharp crack. Evelyn gasped and Maria let out a soft cry, pulling her children closer. "That's enough," Jack's voice thundered, his calm mask slipping. "You've destroyed my son's property and violated our rights." The older officer stepped closer, his smirk returning. What are you going to do about it? Jack straightened, his eyes steely. You're making a mistake, a big one. What the officers didn't know was that Jack wasn't just a father, and in that moment, the line they crossed would change everything. The younger officer's hand moved toward his cuffs, his voice sharp and commanding. Turn around. Hands behind your back. All of you. Evelyn clutched her mother's arm as Lucas's wide eyes darted between the officers and his father. Jack's jaw tightened, but he raised a hand, signaling his family to stay calm. Dad? Evelyn whispered, her voice cracking. It's okay, Jack said softly, his eyes never leaving the officers. But the quiet intensity in his voice hinted at something more. A line had been crossed, and he wasn't going to let it slide. As the younger officer reached for Jack's arm, Jack moved deliberately, reaching into his jacket pocket. The motion was calm, slow enough to show he wasn't a threat, but purposeful enough to halt the officer mid-step. What are you doing? The older officer barked, his hand flying to his taser. Jack's voice was steady, firm. Getting my ID, the one that actually matters. He pulled out a slim black wallet and flipped it open. Sunlight gleamed off the gold badge inside, the words Central Intelligence Agency etched unmistakably into the metal. The atmosphere shifted in an instant. The officers froze. Their smirks evaporated, replaced by wide-eyed confusion. The younger one took a step back, his hand dropping from his weapon. You're CIA? He stammered. That's right, Jack said, his voice low and controlled. And what you're doing here isn't just wrong, it's illegal. The older officer's bravado faltered, his face pale. We didn't know. Jack stepped closer, his badge still visible. You didn't care. You saw my family and made assumptions. You thought you could harass us and get away with it. Lucas stared at his father in awe. Evelyn's breath hitching as she clung to Maria. This wasn't the quiet, unassuming dad they knew. This was a man who had faced dangers they couldn't imagine, and he wasn't backing down. You've destroyed my son's phone, violated our rights, and traumatized my family, Jack continued, his voice sharp. Now you're going to call your supervisor, right? Now. The officers exchanged panicked glances. The older one fumbled for his radio, his hands trembling as he called for their sergeant. The younger officer looked at the ground, his earlier arrogance reduced to shame. Jack turned to his family, his expression softening for a moment. It's going to be okay, he said. But the resolve in his eyes burned brighter than ever. This was far from over. The air was heavy with tension as a black SUV pulled up to the scene. From it emerged Sergeant Cole, a stout man with a weathered face and a no-nonsense demeanor. His sharp gaze swept over the disheveled Parker family, the officers, and the discarded belongings scattered across the gravel. What's going on here? Sergeant Cole demanded, his voice cutting through the charged silence. Jack stepped forward, his CIA badge glinting in the sunlight. His presence was calm but commanding. Your officers racially profiled my family, unlawfully searched our vehicle, destroyed my son's property, and escalated this situation unnecessarily. I want answers. Cole's eyes flicked to the two officers, their postures stiff and defensive. Is this true? He asked, his tone heavy with expectation. Neither man answered. The younger officer shifted uncomfortably, his face pale. The older one looked at the ground, his earlier confidence shattered. It's all on record, Jack added, his tone icy. My son was recording before they smashed his phone, and the footage is backed up to the cloud. Your department will have to answer for this. Cole's jaw tightened as he turned back to the officers. Back to the station? Now. The younger officer hesitated, glancing at Jack, then at his partner. But the sergeant's glare left no room for argument. Both men trudged back to their patrol car, their heads bowed. As the patrol car drove away, Cole faced Jack, his tone softer but firm. Mr. Parker, I deeply apologize on behalf of my department. This behavior is unacceptable. I'll personally ensure there's an investigation and your family will be compensated. Jack's eyes narrowed. Compensation won't undo the trauma they caused my family. I expect transparency and accountability, no cover-ups. You have my word, Cole replied, his voice heavy with sincerity. Behind Jack, Evelyn whispered, "Is it really over, Dad?" Jack turned to his family, his expression softening. "For now, but this is only the beginning." As the sergeant drove away, Maria hugged Jack tightly. Evelyn and Lucas stood close, their trust in their father deepened by his unwavering stance. The road trip, meant to celebrate a milestone, had turned into a moment of reckoning, and Jack knew the fight for justice was far from finished. The SUV hummed back to life as Jack guided the Parker family back onto the road, the tension lingering like an unspoken weight. Lucas sat quietly, his eyes glued to the broken pieces of his phone on the seat beside him. Evelyn leaned against her mother, her thoughts a whirl of confusion and unease. Maria reached over, placing a hand on Jack's arm. "Are we really okay?" she asked softly. Jack didn't take his eyes off the road. "We're safe for now. But this isn't over. Not for us, and not for them." By the time they arrived in Santa Fe, news of the incident was already spreading. Jack had sent the recovered footage from Lucas's phone to a trusted contact at his agency, ensuring it couldn't be buried. That evening, as they unpacked in their hotel room, Maria's phone buzzed incessantly with notifications. "It's online," she said, holding up her phone to show Jack. On the screen was the video Lucas had recorded, the officers' aggressive demeanor, their careless destruction of the family's belongings, and the moment they were confronted with Jack's CIA credentials. It was raw, unfiltered, and impossible to ignore. The video quickly gained traction on social media, sparking outrage across the country. Comments poured in, some expressing anger and solidarity, others dismissing the incident or siding with the officers. The divide was stark, but the conversation had begun. Evelyn scrolled through her own phone, her face a mixture of disbelief and determination. "People are sharing it everywhere," she said. "It's like they're finally listening." Jack sat on the edge of the bed, his expression thoughtful. He had spent years navigating danger in the shadows, but this was different. This was personal. He wasn't just protecting his family now, he was fighting for something bigger. "We can't let this stop here," he said, his voice low but firm. "This isn't just about us, it's about everyone who's been through this and didn't have a voice." Maria nodded, her hand tightening around his. "We'll stand with you." In the days that followed, Jack reached out to civil rights organizations, local leaders, and media outlets. What had started as a family road trip was now a rallying cry for change. Jack's determination ignited a movement that began to ripple far beyond Santa Fe. The Parker family's story became the focal point of a growing national conversation. Media outlets covered the incident relentlessly, replaying the footage of the officers' misconduct and Jack's calm but firm confrontation. Evelyn and Lucas found themselves thrust into the spotlight, their voices unexpectedly amplified in a way they'd never imagined. Evelyn stood nervously before a group of college students during a panel discussion on racial profiling and systemic injustice. Her first semester at Stanford had barely begun, but the university had invited her to speak about her experience. She took a deep breath and stepped up to the microphone. "I used to think this kind of thing only happened in stories or to other people, but it happened to my family, and it changed how I see the world. We can't ignore these issues anymore." Her voice cracked slightly, but the room erupted in applause. Evelyn's heart swelled with a mixture of pride and responsibility. Back in their hometown, Lucas had channeled his energy into something constructive. With Jack's guidance, he created an online project called Profiles of Justice, a platform where people could share their stories of discrimination and injustice. Within weeks, it had hundreds of submissions. "I want people to know they're not alone," Lucas said during a local news interview. His young voice carried a weight far beyond his years. Jack, meanwhile, worked tirelessly behind the scenes. Using his CIA connections and media attention, he pressured local and federal authorities to take action. The officers involved in the incident were suspended pending a full investigation, and the police department announced mandatory bias training for all personnel. But Jack wasn't satisfied with surface-level fixes. He met with civil rights leaders, legislators, and community advocates, pushing for broader reforms. His quiet yet relentless determination began to inspire others, turning the Parker family's ordeal into a catalyst for change. Maria, too, found her voice. At a town hall meeting, she stood before a packed room, her usually gentle demeanor replaced with fiery conviction. This isn't just about one family or one town. This is about a system that needs to change, for all of us. The Parker family's unity became their strength, each member finding a unique way to contribute to the fight for justice. Together they turned their pain into purpose, sparking a movement that was impossible to ignore. Months had passed since that fateful day on the side of a New Mexico road. The Parker family gathered around their dining table at home, the evening sunlight casting a warm glow across their faces. The journey they had embarked on, one that began with celebration but veered into confrontation, had brought them closer than ever. Jack set down his glass, looking at his family. "You've all been incredible. None of this has been easy, but we stood together. And because of that, things are starting to change." Lucas grinned, holding up his tablet. "The website hit 50,000 stories today. People are really sharing their experiences." Maria smiled at her son, pride radiating from her. "You've given them a voice, Lucas. That's something powerful." Evelyn, now more confident and self-assured, leaned forward. "Dad, did you see the statement from the mayor? They're expanding the reforms statewide. It's not everything, but it's a start." Jack nodded, his face thoughtful. "It's a reminder that change takes time and persistence, but what we've done matters. What all of us have done." Their story had ignited a national reckoning. Police departments across the country were under scrutiny, with some implementing sweeping changes in response to the outcry. Jack had testified before Congress, sharing his family's experience and pushing for legislative reforms. The moment he stood in front of lawmakers, his voice steady, he felt the weight of every family who had suffered in silence. Maria had become a local leader for community-driven initiatives, organizing workshops to bridge the gap between law enforcement and the neighborhoods they served. She refused to let her family's story fade into just another headline. Evelyn, now a vocal advocate on her college campus, had rallied her peers to demand transparency and accountability from their local authorities. And Lucas, wise beyond his years, continued to grow his project, helping thousands of people feel seen and heard. That evening, as they clinked their glasses, Evelyn raised hers higher. "To us, and to everyone who refuses to stay silent." "To courage," Maria added, her voice strong. "To justice," Lucas said with a grin. Jack looked at each of them, his chest swelling with pride. "And to never giving up." The Parker family knew their fight wasn't over. There would always be challenges, moments of doubt, and setbacks. But they also knew that together, they were unstoppable. They had faced injustice head-on and come out stronger, their unity a beacon of hope for others. Outside, the world moved on, but the ripple they had created kept growing, touching lives they would never meet. And as the sun dipped below the horizon, the Parker family sat together, ready to face whatever came next, their bond unbreakable and their purpose clear. Don't forget to hit like and subscribe so you won't miss any of our latest videos. If you have any questions or comments, feel free to leave them below. Thank you all for taking the time to watch, and see you in the next video.